I am Victoria Bond and I head up a business called Space. And what we do at Space is we help HR teams take control of their employee engagement. And we do that through giving them data and insights from employee engagement surveys. So a lot of the work that we do is very data driven, and it's about helping organisations to really understand what's going on with their culture and engagement in their teams, and using that data and insight in order to kind of build action plans and improve engagement, or really protect engagement and parts of their culture that are really working for them. One of the things that we see often, and where this webinar has come from, is because we work with more than one HR team, where it can feel like the HR team are not the only people who are accountable or care about employee engagement in the business, but they are doing the lion's share of it. To going down to the kind of granular level of sometimes, we do work with HR teams where they feel maybe they are single-handedly responsible for everybody's happiness in the organisation, and it can be very challenging and very exhausting if that's the approach. And that's where we kind of realised that there was often an accountability gap when it came to employee engagement, that HR as a team, or as a professional, can't single-handedly wrestle engagement and employee engagement in an organisation. Actually, it takes everybody in that organisation to want the same thing and to be driving engagement and accountability. And that's again where this webinar came from, and it's what we're going to explore today is those kind of layers in our organisation, how we can talk to them about employee engagement and start to drive in some employee accountability for employee engagement into the organisation outside of that HR team. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I guess you are probably in the right place if sometimes it feels like you're the only person who cares about engagement or is taking action when it comes to engagement, or that those who have the biggest influence on engagement in the organisation, that's often our senior leaders or our people leaders, show the least interest, or that you just need everybody in your organisation to help you to contribute to your vision about engagement and culture, and you really want to kind of galvanise everyone around what it is that you're looking to do in terms of employee engagement. And so what we're going to talk about really today is about creating that accountability for employee engagement in everybody, and we're going to focus on kind of three key layers in the organisation. We're going to talk about senior leaders, we're going to talk about people managers, and then we're going to talk about individual contributors. So those employees themselves who don't have line management responsibility, and what we can do as individuals in order to take responsibility for our own employee engagement. So the first place that we would always suggest that you start when with employee engagement is everybody needs a really great understanding about where we are and where we are with employee engagement and culture in the organisation. And this can be about doing research. So as I said, the work that we do in Space is very focused on engagement surveys and getting data and insight. Some of you might already be doing that. And if you are, I would encourage you to really often go and revisit that employee engagement surveys. And if you aren't, then go and consider going and doing something like an engagement survey so that you can have some great data points and some really great stuff that you can track when it comes to engagement and culture in your organisation. And we'll kind of come on to why that kind of data and engagement can be really important as we go through. But this is about really getting to grips with employee engagement and where you are today, because this is going to help us to share our story with those people that we need to kind of take accountability in the organisation. So start by doing your research. So start by thinking about, are senior leaders creating the environment that your employees need to thrive? Are you people managers giving your employees the support that they need to thrive? Which areas of your culture and engagement are strengths, and which are opportunities that you might need to kind of action plan and focus on? which teams or demographics need focus and support, and that might even include having identified some risk areas and you need to de-risk them, and the employee engagement activities that have an impact, and the progress that is being made as you go through time. So again, like I say, this is really about a starting point of getting a grip of employee engagement and really understanding kind of where you are today, so that you can have and start or continue to have those conversations with the key people in your organisation that are going to drive accountability. If you don't already have an engagement model, we do in 10 Space, and this is some of the ways that we explore employee engagement in 10 Space. We've built a model around employee engagement. Again, you don't need to use this, but I just thought it'd be kind of useful to just drop this in as a way to kind of think about how we might explore employee engagement and culture and really get a grip on it and really be able to take control about where we are today. So, we explore engagement in terms of connection, and that's about feeling connected to employees and, vision, mission, values, goals, communication, employees having a voice, really feeling connected to the organisation. Leadership is about how confident those employees feel about their leaders, the relationships that they have with them, how inspired they are by them, how supported they feel by them, etc. And fulfillment, that's about how fulfilled people feel with their roles, and things that we explore in there are things like work-life balance and team dynamics, reward, recognition, etc. And then well-being, that's about feeling safe, secure and supported in the workplace, both physically and emotionally. So, for example, we put diversity and inclusion here because that's about psychological safety in the workplace often. So, if anybody wants me to send this model after the call, be really happy to do that. But whatever way you use or tools that you have to explore engagement and culture, the best thing to do is to get real grip and get real clarity about where you are today, so that you can start to have those detailed conversations about the accountability that you need people to take and the action that you need them to take in the organisation. So let's start to have a look at those layers then. We're going to start from the top and we're going to talk about senior leaders. So I think one of the things that we've observed is that right from the outset, in the way that we're setting up roles, we're not necessarily making it clear that there is accountability in senior leaders for culture, engagement and employee experience. So we did a quick kind of paper exercise based on LinkedIn, and we went and had a look at around 100 roles of senior leaders, board level roles that were being advertised on LinkedIn. And when we had a look at these various different senior roles within the organisations that were advertising, we found that only 21.5% of senior leadership and board roles were mentioning being responsible for culture, engagement, employee experience in the teams or organisations. So what that's telling me is actually that we're not, like I say, setting that stall out right from the beginning, that those senior leaders who undoubtedly have an impact on the culture and engagement and how it feels to work in the organisation, and are arguably setting the tone, ultimately, we're not building that into roles right from the beginning, and saying that you are accountable for this, and this is important to your role. Digging a bit deeper, we found that only 44% of CEO job descriptions had that level of accountability in. And so, that person who usually is right at the top of the organisation, ultimately accountable for how it feels to work there, only 44% of job descriptions that we looked at made that really explicitly clear in those job adverts that we looked at. And my favourite, 0% of sales leaders roles that we looked at had any mention of culture, engagement or employee experience in teams or organisations. So I guess the takeaway here is, if it feels like senior leaders maybe aren't connecting with engagement and culture, maybe not taking the accountability and understanding the impact that they have, it's you're probably not alone, and there might be some work to do around kind of senior leaders and helping them to understand that accountability, and even in job descriptions and job adverts. But thinking about that accountability for senior leaders then, so really we've kind of put some points here around the accountability that they do have. So for me, that senior leader accountability is really about defining the culture. So, they are ultimately the people who have or should have the most clarity about where that organization's going and how that culture needs to support the direction of travel. So they really should be there defining the culture and the culture that they need in order for success in the organization. Sometimes they might be responsible for redefining a culture. So where the culture isn't aligning to what is needed in the organization, redefining that and saying we need to build something different. Their accountability is also about keeping culture high on the agenda. And any of you who are on the call who attend board meetings, I would suspect that about 90% of you, it's always finance that comes first and culture is kind of further down the agenda, and that's fine. But it's really about making sure that culture is really high on the agenda with these senior leaders, and that they understand the impact that they can have on the entire organization. Of course, they're usually heading up a department or a division of their own. And again, they've got accountability for making sure that they're shaping up culture for that specific area as well. And I think this is probably the most important thing, that they're holding others accountable and addressing poor culture and I hate the word behaviours, but behaviours when they see it, so that they are the custodians of that culture. And that they are holding others accountable, be it their people managers and the people in their team, or be it others that they feel aren't living up to the values and what they're trying to create. There often will be there to provide resources and investment, of course, where we want to make an investment in a specific area of employee engagement or experience. And again, another really important one, acting as a role model. So again, it wouldn't be unusual for us to see a senior leader who isn't acting as a role model when it comes to culture and engagement, but that really is their accountability as a senior leader in the organisation. So kind of getting a bit more practical then about how we can have this conversation with senior leaders. What we've found is that often they want to, understand the story, and that's where the data and the insight from something like an employee engagement survey can really help. But they also often want to understand the so what, and so that they can connect the impact that they can have and the impact that culture and engagement can have, so it isn't such an abstract topic for them. So, we might want to think about maybe linking engagement data to other data that they're more familiar with, things like sick pay costs and employee attrition costs, or even recruitment fees, maybe, when it comes to kind of, can you link your engagement data and the research that you've done with some of those costs? Do you have any data and insight that relates to them specifically, so that they can understand on a personal level the impact that they're having on the impact that they have on engagement and culture in the organisation? Maybe that might be about specific demographic in their specific division in their team and their own personal engagement scores. Maybe you might have built some stuff into a survey, for example, asking very specifically about senior leaders. But helping them to kind of really bring it back to themselves can be really powerful. And then helping them to look at the future. So can we do a bit of, I don't want to use the word scaremongering, but can we do some predicting about, actually, if we don't take action in this area, or if we don't take action in this area, we might lose this talent, or these costs might be incurred. And can we help them to kind of connect the dots there when it comes to engagement accountability? And so, like I said, there's a certain kind of irony, I guess, in terms of me saying HR and people teams shouldn't be accountable for employee engagement all on their own. But the reality is they might need to help other people in the organisation become accountable. And so here's some of the ways that I believe that HR and people teams can kind of support and help those senior leaders with that. So things like providing regular data and insights, again, from surveys if you have them, highlighting really key areas so they know where to focus and helping them to prioritise, really helping them, supporting with decision making with your expertise or the context that you might have from elsewhere in the business, providing coaching to them. Now that might be directly, or it might also be providing external coach or external resources to help them with their skills. I think it shouldn't be overlooked that building engagement and building culture is a learned skill set often. And so some senior leaders might need some support with that, and that might look like coaching, for example, and then really helping them to demonstrate progress and impact. So, checking in with them regularly and helping them to understand how their story is unfolding when it comes to culture and engagement, so that they can really see the impact that they're having. So thinking about people managers then, so kind of going down a level. So what we often see is that people managers are the biggest influence on how it feels to work in an organisation. So that old saying about people join an organisation and leave a manager is absolutely true. And we often see that kind of people managers are responsible for that's how culture and engagement scales within an organisation. But the kicker with people managers is that we often see that they are the most under-engaged population. And if you think about trying to drive accountability into people managers for taking accountability when it comes to engagement, and we're saying, right, we need you to go and engage your teams, it can be really, really difficult for them to do if they as a population feel under-engaged. And it can actually be really easy for them to scale poor culture and engagement if that's the place that they're in individually. So I think the biggest piece of advice that we have when it comes to people managers and starting that kind of accountability with people managers is to ensure that they are engaged as a population first, because you are going to need them engaged in order to ask them to then go and drive accountability through to go and scale employee engagement throughout their teams. So then what does accountability look like in people leaders? So it might be about, what does great culture mean for your team? So I'm heading up the client success team. What does that mean within my own specific area? And translating that culture that's kind of usually been usually defined and set by that senior leadership team, translating that down into the reality of what it looks like within their team on a day-to-day basis. And again, if they're not in the right place, redefining that culture and really taking accountability for, I'm not in the place that I want to be, and I'm going to take accountability for driving this in a different way. Thinking about the people managers can often be responsible for kind of opening up that flow of feedback within their teams and creating a safe space where people feel like they're able to give feedback. We'll talk about that a little bit more when it comes to individual contributors, but we know that being able to give feedback and an impact being given from feedback is a really key indicator, a really key driver of engagement within teams. And so people managers can really set the tone here for encouraging the flow of feedback in their teams, and that can be really important. And it can be really helpful for them if they've got that regular flow of feedback coming through to really make sure that they've got a grip on what's going on in terms of engagement and using that feedback. Again, there's definitely something around them holding their teams accountable, addressing poor culture. And I'm sure every one of you on this call has had that experience where there is a team member who might have brought in the last piece of big revenue, or they're the only ones that hold the keys to the platform, or they worked late last Thursday delivering the projects, but actually they don't fit within the values and the culture of the organisation. And people managers really need to think long and hard about who's shaping up their culture and engagement in their teams, and the impact that those individuals are having, and addressing things where it's not going right. And again, action is that role model. And I would take you back kind of a slide to that under engagement. It's really hard for people managers to act as role models if they themselves are not feeling engaged. And so again, what we often do in engagement surveys is have a look at the layers that go through an organization, and having a look at kind of people managers and the engagement as a population, and making sure that they have everything that they need to engage themselves so that they can then go and engage their teams. So what does that look like for kind of HR and people leaders? How can we support them and how can we help them? Well, we can make sure that they are engaged to engage other people. As I said, we can help them to gain the skills that they need in order to support their team. So again, I would really argue that building engagement and culture in teams is a learned skill. It's something that potentially, if they haven't had great people leaders in the past, they might not have seen what great looks like in this area. So really thinking about how you can support teams to gain skills in that area, and providing that kind of regular data and insight for those teams, so that they've got real clarity about what's going on with people, with people in their team, what's in the state of play when it comes to engagement and culture, and where are those key areas that they really need to be thinking about. Helping them support action plans. So, there's no point in kind of capturing the data and having a wish list of things that you want to do if you're not going to go and action plan it. And as people in HR teams, we can often support them with those action plans and getting them delivered. Providing them coaching. So for the people management layer, this might be we're providing coaching directly, or it might again be for external coaches and support to make sure that they've got everything that they need, and helping them to demonstrate progress and impacts so that they can see their engagement story and their culture story evolving over time as they're taking more accountability and they're taking the action. So I think one of the things that that we often don't talk about is the responsibility and accountability that individuals have for their own personal engagement. And I really strongly believe that employees need to make sure that they are personally engaged themselves and that they are happy at work. And there's some controversial stuff in here, so please forgive me if it feels a bit uncomfortable, but this is really about those individuals. I guess a practical example, if I think back on my HR career in the past, and I think of how many grievances I sat in, for example, where actually the right answer was that the employee had just fallen out of love of the organisation and they just weren't personally engaged anymore. And that was probably the right answer, rather than that something, that there was a genuine grievance there. I think that, we really do, as individual employees, as individual contributors, need to have this, the conversation with employees that they are largely responsible for their own engagement, and to make sure that they are happy at work. And thinking about, that engagement model, if they don't understand the vision and the goals and how they fit in, right, well, how can we, going and asking that of their people leaders, and going and saying, I need you to revisit this with me. I don't understand where I fit in, or I don't feel like I'm getting the recognition that I need for my role, or my work-life balance isn't working for me. These can be quite brave conversations, but it's really, and they can really depend on that relationship that you've got with your people leaders, which is where they can really come in. But I think sometimes we do see that employees and individual contributors expect to sit there and be engaged, and it needs to be a two-way conversation, and they need to be raising with their people leaders if their engagement has dropped, and giving us the opportunity in order to address that, and really being able to share that honest, constructive feedback. And whether that's about an environment that their people leaders have created so they can give that directly, or whether that's about being open and honest in an engagement survey and taking the time to go and complete something like that. I think we can have that conversation with individual contributors to say, we want you to be engaged, but if you feel like your engagement has dropped, then we need your support in order to help you identify why that is and how we can get you back on track. And sometimes, like I say, the brutal truth is that employees fall out of love with the organisation sometimes, and sometimes it is just time for them to move on. And I think, again, if I think back into my HR career, the number of times that we try to save an employee that would ultimately, from a resignation, that would ultimately end up leaving anyway, because they'd already fallen out of love with the organisation. And I think disengagement in a team can be quite damaging. So sometimes, as much as I hate to say it, we might just need to have that reality check about whether employees are disengaged, and whether we might need a conversation about how we can re-engage them, or what that next step is if we feel like they've just totally fallen out of love with the organisation, and what that reality check is, I guess. Oh, I feel like I've talked 100 miles an hour. Right, so some key takeaways then. So number one, everybody needs to be responsible for employee engagement in their organisation, including the individuals. Number two, have a clear grip on where your culture and engagement are today, because you'll need that to be able to tell the story and have that conversation with those people that you're trying to drive accountability in. Number three, engage in senior leaders with data and a business case if you need it. So talking to them in language that they're probably used to. And that's where data and insight can really come in, because it can feel less abstract to those senior leaders. Senior leaders really need to understand their own personal impacts, and we can help them with that through data and insight, etc., and by sharing the story and helping them to understand the impact that they have. Number five, we can help our people leaders translate culture into their teams and helping them to scale that. But people leaders also need to be making sure that they are addressing poor engagement, and that they are that they're helping their teams to bring their best selves to work. But we might also need to make sure that those people leaders themselves are engaged. And sometimes it's best to help employees move on where we can see that they really have fallen out of love with the organisation, and that's part of that individual contributors' responsibility, is to know what they need in order to re-engage them, or what the alternative is. So we were always going to recommend that when we're kind of talking about accountability and employee engagement in general in the organisation, we'd always recommend that you're checking in on a regular basis to make sure that you understand where your teams are and what actions you might need to be taken. I know I've talked a lot about surveys, it's kind of what I do, but really making sure that you're creating a clear employee voice to teams and ensuring that you've got that continual flow of insight can really help you to remain ahead, and to help you have those really great conversations with the people that you want to create accountability in. And really keeping an eye on that kind of business strategy so that you understand exactly what's needed for success, and that you can go out and kind of listen to your teams, and that you can really make sure that you've got control over employee engagement in your organisation. You know exactly where you are. Okay, so thank you very much for joining. I did promise it would only be half an hour, and we're nearly bang on. So if you want to keep in touch, you can check out our website on the left and our LinkedIn page on the left, and then I'm on the right. So I'm Victoria, as I said, that's my email address. You can check me out on LinkedIn as well, that's my LinkedIn page. And if you really would like to hear me doing some more talking about HR, people, engagement, etc., then you can check me out on our regular a podcast called HR Directors Cut.